Welcome to Politics, all things Texas. We are back after a short break dealing with regular sessions, special sessions, even a quorum break to Washington, D.C. But we're glad to be back. We're going to have some great shows. We'll be getting into lots of things as we approach the 2022 election season. So I hope you enjoyed my show today. You can always follow me at TMFTX on both Facebook and Twitter, TMFTX. We're going to have a wonderful show today. We're going to have Scott Braddock, who is one of the he's the insider's insider at the Texas Capitol. We're going to talk a little bit about special sessions in the 2022 elections. And we're also going to have Father David Garcia. Many of you know him. He has just written a book. We're going to talk all about it and tell you where you can get it. Thank you for supporting Politics. Thank you for listening. If you have a suggestion for the show or an idea for a potential episode, I value your feedback. Email your suggestions to contact@TreyMartinezFischer.com. As always, thank you for listening to Politics. Okay, we are back. I have a very special guest coming on this pod. You all know him, especially you from San Antonio. He has been a priest for the last 46 years. He's now in retirement. Many people know him as Father David, the community leader. Some of you know him as Father David, the pastor and rector of San Fernando Cathedral. Many of you know him as Father David, who ran the historic mission fundraising to restore our fabulous missions, and which in fact, also led to our UNESCO designation for having such wonderfully restored missions. And he's just a terrific man and a wonderful pastoral leader, our faith leader, and a good friend of my family. Father David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Trey. Appreciate it and happy to be here.
And we are here today because, drum roll, please. I mean, we have the announcement of the release of your new book, Pandemic Preaching. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, well, you started receiving it pretty quickly, right, as it began. The idea was when everything shut down at the beginning of the virus, at the coronavirus, March of last year, I got a lot of requests from people because they couldn't go to churches anymore. Could you at least send us something to reflect on, some kind of a little homily, a sermon, because we appreciate your sermons, because we feel that you know how to connect real life stories with the gospel. So I resisted it first because I thought, God, this is going to be work. But then I thought, I'm shut down like everybody else is shut down, so I might as well do it. So it started that way, and it went for a year. And I basically was trying to pick up the stories of the human story of the pandemic. I mean, we all know the bigger story about it. It was a terrible virus, and it was killing people, and it was shutting down the countries and the economy and everything. But there was many human stories in there that were uplifting, that were really showing us how good people can be in a moment of emergency, and in a dark moment, in a difficult moment when we didn't know what was going to happen. Because if you remember last year in March, they were talking about it, but nobody really knew it. I mean, nobody had studied it. It was just too new. So we were all terrified. And I remember talking to you at the time saying, we're all staying home, But these homilies were designed to say, you know what? God has something to tell us through this crisis. And let's pay attention and let's look around us at how God can work in other people.
No, well, it's fantastic. And, and for those of you that are learning about this for the first time, Father David essentially produced a homily a week for an entire year during the pandemic when people couldn't go to church. And I'll just tell you from my experience, just the idea of being able to read your homily. We always did it at dinner time. As you know, Father, I have two young daughters. You baptized one of them. To get them to read, we just passed the laptop around the table and everybody read a paragraph or two. And for those of you who have not seen these homilies, and I mean this in the most, flattering way possible, I've never seen somebody take what's happening in the world or what's happening in the country, what's on the front page of the New York Times, and tie it to scripture and connect it to, the life of Jesus Christ and our Bible. And that's a tremendous talent, Father. And now you've sort of captured all this over the course of the year through the focus of a pandemic, right?
Absolutely. And, we were all going through this together, and it was something that nobody had ever experienced. So what I was trying to do was say, okay, what are we learning about this from the human story and from what scripture is saying, so that we in some way can be better after this is over with? That we can be encouraged, that we can have hope, that we can reach out to each other a little bit more, because as you can imagine, and the last few years have been very divisive, in many ways very ugly, and people have been at each other's throats, and yet we all got stuck in the same thing. Nobody could get out of the pandemic. It was for everybody. And so we were living this together. So then the question is, if we are in this together, we need to be in solidarity with each other. How can we help each other? And how can we come out of this at the end better because of it?
Well, it's a tremendous, just project in your retirement, right? You're quote unquote retired. I've sent this out to my email community, and they always say in politics, be careful about religion, because that's one of those issues that there is no compromise. And my email list is about 10,000 strong, and we would send out these emails, and we would get nothing but praise and thanks even for non-Christians to acknowledge that somebody was saying things about the pandemic, about real life, tying it to faith. So look, what's the most important part? This book is just went out. I did a quick look on Amazon, and we're going to put the link up, on this pod, so folks know where to buy it. But I already see that it's been designated by Amazon as #1 in the new release category for Christian Bible exegesis, which I believe is interpretations of Scripture. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Thank you for telling me.
Well, so where else can we find this book other than Amazon? Do you know?
Well, obviously it's WIF in stock, WIPF and stock.com is the publisher, so you can get it there. You can get it at barnesandnoble.com. But we are working so that those who live in San Antonio, your constituents and others, can get it. We're hoping, we know for sure San Fernando Cathedral Gift Shop has already put in a big order, and they expect it within about a week or 10 days. And we're working with Twig at the Pearl. We're working with the missions. There's a gift shop at San Jose and a gift shop at Espada. And we're working with them to carry it. And we're going to just try to, Guadalupe Community Center, we're trying to get them to carry it on the west side as well. So we're hoping that if local people can carry it, then that'll happen. We're going to also be doing book signings. I'll be doing a book signing at Mission Concepcion on December the 5th after masses, and December 19th at the cathedral after the morning masses. So there'll be other ones that will be announced that people can go to if they want to.
Well, good. Well, listen, that's good to know, and get that hand ready, because there's 149 colleagues I serve with in the House, and who knows what they may get under their tree for Christmas, a signed autographed book from you, Father. Listen, I appreciate, you taking time, number one. Number two, thank you for not retiring and staying active. And just, for those of you who have not yet become familiar with Father David and his preaching, this is a wonderful book, just in time for the holidays. It's
I'll give you, here's the book. I just got it yesterday.
Pandemic Preaching. Well, there you go. Father, thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and you're always welcome on this podcast. This is Scott Braddock of the Quorum Report. Scott has been a fixture in Texas politics for a very long time. I want to say, Scott, that you probably invented the hashtag, and I'm going to mess it up here, but I always see IYKYK. If you know, you know.
Yeah, I didn't come up with that, but I'll take credit.
When I see you breaking news, especially on Twitter, I always see that hashtag. I mean, I know what that means, man. This is somebody who can see around the corner of the Texas Capitol. Scott, this is a podcast that we're just, it's straight talk, real talk to regular folks.
Yeah.
And welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm doing great. It's a dreary day in Austin, but an exciting day in Texas politics. And you know that with the filing period coming up, right? I mean, we're just days away from that now. The speculation season is in full swing, right? You start to get all of the messages. It's either text message, email, people calling you, and they all start this way. They say, "Now you didn't hear this from me, but I think, so-and-so is going to run for this, or so-and-so is going to run for that." And, people start to get antsy, and it's that time in politics where it's, Fischer cut bait time, right? Like some people have talked a lot about whether they're going to run for this or that. But now it's time to actually put your name on the ballot, which of course you've done many times. You know what that's all about.
Yeah, no, you're right. And when I heard you say that, it sometimes made me think how silly that sounds. It's like, you didn't hear this from me, but Yeah, no, that's pretty much how it works. It happens on my side too, right? We deal with
Mhm.
candidate recruitment, we deal
Yeah.
with people retiring, or folks wanting to challenge people, and so you get a lot of that cloak and dagger, right? So it's good to know that it happens on both sides of the fence.
Well, and you can tell just how serious they are. If they text you, that's one thing. Then someone might say, can we move this over to Signal? Because they don't want it to be tracked. That's supposed to be somehow more secure. I'm not a tech guy, so I am told it is more secure. But if they really don't want anybody to know, they'll either call you or have you meet them somewhere, right? Because they're worried that it's going to get traced back to them. It is funny how that works.
That's my rule. We're going to meet in the swimming pool. That's the rule.
Yeah, right.
So look, talk to me, man. We've been
Mhm.
through a bunch of special sessions, and I didn't enjoy any of them, for the record.
Was
But
it that bad?
well, I'll tell you what. I'm an institutionalist, and I believe that the House needs to exercise its relevance. And it just seemed to
Mhm.
me that we were just bowing to the dictates of the governor. That's not how special sessions work. The old rule is the governor can call a special whenever he or
Mhm.
she wants to. We get to decide the outcome. And I think by not putting our foot down, by not pushing back, I mean, if anybody gets 4 or 5 times to pass a bill, ultimately they're going to pass something. And I
Mhm.
think that's the tragedy with transgender children. They just get picked on and picked on and picked on. If we would have put our foot down one time, said we tried it, it didn't work, maybe, there'd be some people in the state of Texas, some children that wouldn't feel humiliated and thinking that the state wants to attack them for who they are.
Yeah, well, and I think what you're saying is not a partisan comment. I mean, we have seen Republican speakers in the past who were willing to do that, right? That you might have the governor saying that he wants to put a certain item on the agenda. And yes, that is up for debate, but then it's up to the deliberative bodies to figure out whether it's going to pass. And that's true for the Senate. It's less true now with the little governor, Dan Patrick, as I call him. He kind of rules over there with an iron fist. They basically do whatever he wants over there. And that's, I think, even some of the Democrats go along maybe a little bit too much. They get criticized as going along too much with the lieutenant governor. But in the House, there has been a history of, and you go back to Speaker Strauss, even Speaker Bonin to a certain degree would say no to the governor sometimes, or basically say nothing. Right. I mean, if the governor wants something, it's on the governor to actually work with legislators to make that thing happen. And this is a governor who has never done that. And this isn't a partisan thing either. I mean, I can remember in his first session as governor, where Greg Abbott went and talked, this was in 2015, he went and talked to the Republican caucus about what he wanted to do, which I think was a positive proposal on pre-kindergarten in Texas, try to expand the opportunities for kids to be in pre-K. And he told the Republican members at that time who were being criticized as being somehow socialist to support a program like that. People in their far right wing of their party were saying this is godless socialism. I wish I was making that up, but they weren't. To expand, but I'm not. But pre-K program. Abbott told those Republicans at that time that if they got challenged in their primaries, then he would be there to help them. And he just didn't do that at all when they were challenged in their primaries. And as you know, he actually ended up supporting some challengers to Republican, incumbents in the Texas House. So he's had more of an adversarial relationship with the House rather than collaborating with it. And again, among Republicans and Democrats on a lot of these issues.
And I think if you're not protecting the institution, I mean, the governor has 140 days to pass his agenda. He's pretty powerful, has a lot of leverage during that time period. And when the clock runs out, the clock runs out. You don't use these extensions of time because, lawmakers said no in the regular session. So that was kind of my how I felt. And I just think if regardless of partisan politics, if we want the House to be strong, we have to act strong. And by just sort of giving in because you keep asking and you keep asking, look, we have a 12 and 11-year-old in the House. I know what it feels like to Dad, can we 15 more minutes, 15 more minutes, 15 more minutes? No, it's bedtime. At some point you just give in after the fifth time. And that's how I kind of felt these special sessions were sort of being used in that capacity. And it's not just bad for Democrats. I think it's bad for the House.
I think that anybody who is an employee or an employer can relate to what I'm about to say, which is you do want your employees to finish their tasks, right? And the members of the House, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the senators at the Texas Capitol, they all have the same boss, which is the voters, right? And so the voters are going to judge them based on what their work product was. But you know what? When you have an employee and the voters have these politicians as their employees, including yourself, you also have deadlines for your employees, right? They have to get things done, but they also have to get it done on time. And that's true in any business. And like you say, in Texas, and this is interesting, it's been the same people over the years, and you've heard this argument a million times. Some people will say we should have a full-time legislature. And the people who say that we shouldn't are the same ones this year who have kept the legislature in session for 10 months, right? On and on and on. And it seems, back to the conversation about the governor, with a governor who's lost control, and when they lose control of the legislative process, this is what it looks like. A nonstop legislative session, a never-ending perpetual, because there's always one more thing. And I had heard from some Republicans, some office holders who had said, look, we have got to get out of Austin because based on what's going on in the Republican primary, where you have some folks coming at Abbott from his right, if you can imagine it, they want more and more things like the transgender sports bill. Now they want another bill to be passed dealing with transgender children as well. There's never enough for the folks who are in the extremes of both parties, honestly. And so if you continue to keep the legislature in session, Republicans were worried that who knows week to week what's going to be on that agenda. You work with the members to figure out what the agenda is going to be, figure out what you can pass, and then move on. And at some point, and this is the way I've thought about Texas government for many years, this is the way I organize it in my head, just two phases, right? It's when the politicians are making decisions during session, right? And then it's when the campaigns happen and the voters make decisions. And we're well past the point where it's time to move on to the campaigns and have the voters make decisions, render their judgment on the politicians of the work that they've done so far.
And maybe I'm just, not good at political forecasting anymore, but what is driving this? I mean, I know everyone always talks about, primary voters. The last time I checked, Governor Abbott seems to have a pretty firm handle on his Republican primary.
Yeah.
Why the need to continue to sort of go after these, red meat, dog whistle type politics, special session after special session?
I'll take this vaccine mandate issue as the prime example on it, because I do think, and I've said this many times, and I don't know where you're at on this, but I feel that the Donald Trump phenomenon is really more of a symptom than the disease of what is wrong with our politics. And I do think it's something that even a lot of Republicans would like to get away from. I hear from a lot of Republicans who are giddy about the fact that Trump won't be in the White House or on the ballot the next time they run here in Texas, because he did cause some problems for those down ballot Republicans who were successful in their races. I mean, if you think about the elections just this week, is it that much different from last year? When Republicans did pretty well down ballot in 2020, it was one Republican candidate who couldn't get it done, and that was Donald Trump. Trump himself, at one of his big rallies, was booed by the crowd when he said that he got a vaccination, right? And that's the only time I've seen his crowd ever do that. So when he was appealing to a lot of those folks, including the anti-vax crowd, those folks who are not, and that's not all the base of the Republican Party, but they're part of it. They're part of the coalition for Republicans. This is one of those things that GOP office holders have become afraid of, that they'll be punished by this small group of people in their primary. You have the Republican Party of Texas right now promoting, and I don't know if they've wrapped it up or if they're still doing it, but I saw earlier in the week, they were promoting the fact that they had a petition to give to Governor Abbott that is calling for another special session specifically on vaccine mandates. The number of people who have signed it is about 2,500, which that might sound like a lot of people. It's 0.008% of 29 million Texans who live across 254 counties and 2 time zones, right? So we're talking about a very small minority who's very fired up about this, but it is the thing that Abbott pays attention to, because these are a lot of the folks, and this is where the energy is in the Republican Party. And look, Governor Abbott sought the endorsement of Donald Trump. Remember, he and the former president appeared at the border together to show that they're tough on this. And the governor had, I think, and this was my understanding according to my reporting, they basically had a plan that they were going to appear with Trump once. They were going to get the endorsement from Trump for Governor Abbott. And it was going to be sort of a one and done deal. They wouldn't be appearing with him again, and they wouldn't be constantly trying to appease Trump and his supporters. But that's not how it works with former President Trump, right? He's going to call back and ask for something else. And what was the something else? Even after, how long did it take? 8 months after 2 Democratic walkouts, all this drama, in Austin to pass the elections bill. And it's my understanding that Lieutenant Governor Patrick called former President Trump from the dais in the Texas Senate on his cell phone and told Trump, hey, we're passing the elections bill right now. It's a big victory for you. And even after that, former President Trump wasn't satisfied. He said, what do we need to do? We need to have an election audit of the 2020 election in a state that he carried, that he won, right? And so it's never enough for Trump. And Abbott's learning that, right? What did Abbott do after that? Well, the Secretary of State's office announced that they were going to audit 4 counties. And I had Republicans saying to me, there's nothing in the law that says that they can do forensic audits of any counties, really, and certainly nothing in the big elections bill that passed that would authorize that, which takes effect in December. So it's never enough for these folks. And at some point, the next phase of government has to take place. At some point, these Republicans who are so afraid of those voters have to face those voters. You can't just stay in session forever, and while they were criticizing Democrats for being in Washington and not being, including yourself, and not being back here, in Austin, that they're sort of acting like y'all are afraid to come to the Capitol, and face the legislative music, if you will. If you're going to stay in session forever, that means that you're sort of afraid of facing the voters, right? And so it's time to move on to that now that we're getting up to filing period.
So do you think that whole notion of audits and how former President Trump has been very vocal on that, did that have something to do with this new Secretary of State, as I understand, was one of the lawyers who worked for former President Trump to challenge these elections across the country?
John Scott from Fort Worth, I think he worked on the case for about 3 days, and it looked like he was, somebody who is a sort of a true believer, somebody who, thinks that there was a potential that there was, some malfeasance in the election in Pennsylvania, where he was going to help them try to overturn the election results. Because he worked on it for such a short period of time, I'm willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he got in there as an attorney, and we should say that he was an attorney working on that. Maybe he got in there and looked under the hood and said, look, there's nothing to this case and I'm out of here. I mean, that's possible. There were others who helped as well, who also got out of there, sort of quietly withdrew, including Senator Brian Hughes from East Texas, who helped work on some of these cases to try to overturn the elections. It's fascinating to me that there was so much questioning over the last year, and we're a year now from the last election, so much questioning by some of these Republicans of the result. But then when they won this week, I don't see anybody questioning. Oh wow, that in this place, and this was pointed out to me this morning, in Virginia, where the legislature passed some legislation earlier this year or last year to open up the franchise more, make it easier to vote. And Republicans were happy to take advantage of that. And I think one lesson for Democrats and all of that is that, look, the Republicans are all, no matter what the rules are for voting, they're happy to sort of be nimble and work around it, right? And do whatever they need to do to win. While too often a lot of folks hear from Democrats that it's so hard to vote. These folks are trying to oppress you and keep you from voting and all that. And that doesn't mean those things shouldn't be challenged in court if they're in violation of the Voting Rights Act and all of that. But I think if you're trying to appeal to people who are, in the Democratic coalition, folks who are people of color, folks who are younger, I think the message on voting should just be 3 things. Hey, it's fun, cool, and easy. Go do it.
Right. And so speaking of that, I mean, we had a big election on Tuesday night in Virginia, New Jersey, and other places. We got about a minute left.
Mm-hmm.
What was your assessment of Tuesday's election, and how do you see that, sort of foreshadow the Texas 2022 election cycle?
Oh, wait, if we got a minute left, I'm asking you a question first.
Okay, well, we had a minute and a half. You go.
I get 30 seconds from you. So have you made any decisions on running for Congress? I know there was some talk about whether, you had any input on what the map looks like in one of those districts. I know Senator Huffman talked about that, and you had said you were taking a look at it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I filed an amendment, San Antonio, the Congressional 35, which folks who don't know, runs from San Antonio to Austin.
Mm-hmm.
It was created 10 years ago to recognize the growth of San Antonio and Hays County. So it was always going to be a San Antonio centered district. Gerrymandering and partisan politics took, that district all the way into Austin, sort of as a way to mess with Lloyd Doggett. Now 10 years later, Lloyd Doggett gets a district back wholly within Austin, the 37. So quite naturally, equity would then return 35 to its legacy, which is to be a San Antonio Center district. I offered an amendment to maintain that by keeping the population, more concentrated in San Antonio than the current rendition. The current 35 that's just been signed into law, moved about 42,000 new people into Austin. So that was the amendment that I offered. It was kind of flattering to hear Senator Huffman mention that she made an accommodation for me. She moved the line like 3 houses so that my home could be in the 35th, which I guess I appreciate.
I think people think that's interesting.
It had nothing to do with the amendment that I had offered, but all that being said, I am looking at the 35 pretty hard. I think it's, I think the hardest part, which is convincing family to see whether they would be all in. I have young children. My wife is a professional. I have a mom who depends on me. So sort of going through all of those questions. And I think that I feel comfortable with those answers. Now it's really just kind of the political analysis and the assessment, not to mention the fact that I have a good friend of mine, as you know, Representative Eddie Rodriguez, is also looking at that district very, very seriously. So look, I think that I'll make 2 predictions. Number one, Eddie and I will never be tangled up in a race.
That's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. I mean, you make very few friendships in politics. That is a friendship that I value. We're not going to do that. I think he feels the same way. That being said, if one of us has the eye of the tiger, then I think the other one of us needs to get out of the way and help that person, fulfill its goals. Look, I think I'm days away from making that final decision. Yeah. Never say never. But again, this is a decision that's going to impact communities from San Antonio all the way up to now Pflugerville, because this district doesn't stop at the river anymore. It runs all the way to Pflugerville.
And I think, what was your question for me? Predictions for 2020?
Yeah, whatever. Tell me what you saw Tuesday night and how that might impact.
How it might play.
Yeah.
I think that this issue, and this is something Democrats have got to figure out if they want to be competitive in places like Texas and elsewhere. And I think there's a good shot for Democrats to be competitive in Texas. We always hear that. And there's sort of the tyranny of the narrative of, is Texas going to turn blue? And people act like that's the only way you can talk about Texas politics. I reject that. I think that we're much more nuanced than that. Right. I think that because of the way the maps were drawn and because of some of the things you're talking about with those congressional districts, the way the Texas House maps came out, the way the Senate maps came out, and I would mainly point at the Texas House map because of the decisions. And you, as somebody you've worked on redistricting issues for many years, of course, I think I first got to know you you probably don't even remember first conversations, maybe all the way back to 2003. When
KRLD,
I was,
so
it would have been KRLD in Dallas in 2008. Back to 2003 would have been KTRH in Houston. So, I was a radio reporter. I was working in those different cities, but I was very interested in what was happening at the Capitol. So we would have had conversations almost 20 years ago. So redistricting has been on the minds of, people who are trying to figure out if they're going to run for office, right? And they're looking at the maps. They're looking at, whether or not it's a district they can run and win, raise money and all that, like we talked about before. But because of the Supreme Court decisions over the last decade, the Voting Rights Act is very different. Right. And a lot of your listeners would say it's a lot worse. Right. So the way that these maps can be challenged is basically only on whether it's racially discriminatory. Right. You can't say that, oh, wow, this thing is too Republican, or in some other states, they might say it's too Democratic. So I think that there's probably a good chance that Democrats probably hold what they have in legislative bodies for the most part. I think it'd probably shift some in the Senate. That's the way it's drawn now. Of course, we have to see what happens with court challenges on all that. But in the Virginia election, the New Jersey election, and this is what I was going to say, the Democrats really have to figure out. This whole thing with schools and whether critical race theory is something that's whether it's a real issue. I mean, we see this happen all the time where there is some grain of truth to whatever your opposition is talking about, and then they blow it up into something huge. I think critical race theory has kind of become a stand-in word for a lot of these culture war things that Republicans want to talk about and get people whipped up about, a lot like the defund the police thing was last year. Right before in the 18 months or whatever leading up to the last election, it was all this stuff about defunding police, and Democrats never having a great answer for that. Right. Democrats would say, well, we're not for defunding the police. There's some people in the party who are, but to have a real message. I mean, I had thought maybe it would be smart for Democrats to go to Greg Abbott's press conferences, because he was saying that Democrats should sign our pledge to support the cops. Well, okay, well, we're fine. We'll support the cops. We're going to do that. But Democrats kind of said, well, nobody supports defunding the police, but it didn't resonate. And here's the thing, as you know, it's a knife fight. the Republicans come in and they might say something that, has a kernel of truth, but they blow it up into something that's huge. And you want to not take it seriously because, well, maybe what they're saying isn't 100% true. But in the moment, the voters are hearing all this stuff. And if you don't have an argument for what you're for and something against what they're trying to tag you with, then, I think all bets are off.
Thank you, everybody. We had a great show. I want to thank my guests, Scott Braddock and Father David Garcia. Don't forget to go out and pick out a copy of your book. You can find it on Amazon. Follow the link. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Politex.